The silver-haired woman stepped through the glass doors of Thunderstrike Martial Arts, her weathered hands gripping a faded gym bag. At 74, Margaret Stone moved with deliberate precision, each step carrying the weight of countless years on training mats around the world. "Excuse me, are you lost?" The receptionist's perfectly manicured eyebrows arched skeptically. "The community center's senior activities are 3 blocks down." Margaret smiled patiently. "I'm here for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training." The receptionist's expression shifted from confusion to barely concealed amusement. "Ma'am, our classes are quite intense. Perhaps you'd prefer our gentle yoga sessions." Little did they know, they were speaking to a legend. The move that changed everything 3 weeks earlier, Margaret had folded her black belt, its edges frayed from 4 decades of use, and packed it carefully in her suitcase. The funeral was behind her now. Robert was gone, and at 74, she faced a choice that would define her remaining years: surrender to grief and age, or continue the journey that had shaped her since 1979. The apartment in Riverside was modest but adequate. As she unpacked her belongings, her fingers traced the photographs lining her dresser. Images of tournaments, training sessions, and a life lived on the edge of what people thought possible for a woman, especially one now in her 70s. "Your joints aren't getting any younger, Maggie," she whispered to her reflection, noting the silver hair she now wore in a practical bun. The lines that mapped decades of experience across her face. But her eyes, those remained sharp, alert, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had never backed down from a challenge. Her physician had been clear during their last appointment. "Keep moving or start declining, Mrs. Stone. At your age, the choice is binary." For Margaret, there had never been any question. The Academy of Arrogance Thunderstrike Martial Arts occupied an impressive corner building, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a pristine training facility. Mercedes and BMWs filled the parking lot, their owners dressed in designer athletic wear that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Margaret's modest Honda seemed almost apologetic among the luxury vehicles. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with competitive energy. Young athletes in crisp uniforms practiced their techniques under the watchful eye of the head instructor, a man whose very presence commanded attention. But they were about to learn that true power doesn't always come in expected packages. Instructor Marcus Rivera was everything you'd expect from an elite martial arts coach. Mid-30s, powerfully built, with competition patches covering his uniform like badges of honor. His black belt was tied with military precision, and he moved through the training floor with the confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority. When his gaze fell upon Margaret, his expression shifted through surprise, amusement, and finally landed on condescending concern. "Ma'am, I think you've taken a wrong turn," he announced loudly enough for the entire class to hear. "Senior water aerobics meets at the community pool on Tuesdays." Laughter rippled through the room like a wave. 20 pairs of young eyes turned toward the elderly woman, their expressions ranging from amused to pitying. Margaret remained perfectly still, her voice calm and measured. "I'm here for jiu-jitsu training. I recently moved to town and need a new place to practice." The room erupted in barely suppressed chuckles. The challenge that changed everything practice. Marcus's smile grew wider, playing to his audience. "Listen, grandmother, this isn't a hobby club. We train fighters here. Competitors. People who can handle real physical contact." "I understand," Margaret replied evenly. "I've been training since 1979. This brought more laughter from the students. Marcus raised his hand, silencing them with theatrical authority. "What belt do you claim to hold?" "I don't claim anything," Margaret responded, her tone unchanged. "I earned my 3rd-degree black belt under Master Hiroshi Tanaka in 1998. A flicker of recognition crossed one of the senior students' faces, but Marcus was too caught up in his performance to notice. "Well, things were different back then," he said dismissively. "Standards have evolved. Why don't you observe from the viewing area?" That might help you understand what modern training involves. But Margaret Chen hadn't spent 44 years on the mat to be dismissed so easily. "I didn't come here to watch," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that momentarily silenced the room. "I came to train." Marcus crossed his arms, his smirk widening. "You want to train? Fine. Show me you can handle basic movement with one of my students. I'd prefer to work with you, Instructor Rivera." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh snap," before quickly falling quiet. Marcus's expression hardened. The challenge hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Refuse, and he'd lose face in front of his students. Accept, and he'd have to physically engage with a woman old enough to be his grandmother. After a moment's hesitation, his arrogance reasserted itself. This would be an opportunity to demonstrate professional handling of an awkward situation. He'd go easy on the old lady, show a few basic moves, and gently but firmly demonstrate why this wasn't her place. "Fine," he said, his confident smile returning. 3 minutes. Light demonstration. Just to assess your movement." He had no idea what he was walking into. The 10 seconds that changed history, the class formed a circle around the main training area. Marcus made a show of removing his instructor patches, rolling his shoulders with practiced confidence. Margaret took her position with unhurried precision, her movements surprisingly fluid. "I'll go very light," Marcus announced to his audience. "Just basic positions, no submissions." "I'm ready when you are, instructor," Margaret replied quietly. What happened next would be talked about for years. "Begin," Marcus called out, dropping into his stance. He circled slowly, his movements deliberately measured, a performance of restraint for his watching students. "In jiu-jitsu, we use leverage rather than strength," he explained loudly, reaching for Margaret's sleeve to demonstrate a simple grip technique. The moment his hand made contact with her uniform, everything changed. Margaret's weight shifted almost imperceptibly. Her hand closed over his wrist with surprising firmness. Before Marcus could process what was happening, she executed a perfect sleeve drag, disrupting his balance and forcing him forward. It was a textbook setup, and he walked right into it. In the next instant, Margaret dropped to a seated position, her legs shooting forward between Marcus's, hooking his ankle. Simultaneously, her grip transferred from his sleeve to his collar, pulling him forward as her hip rotated. The movement was fluid, precise, and devastatingly effective. Marcus, caught completely off guard, toppled forward. By the time his knees hit the mat, Margaret had already transitioned, securing a technical mount position that no 74-year-old should have been capable of achieving against a black belt in his prime. A collective gasp swept through the room. "What the?" Marcus started, his composure cracking as he attempted to regain control. But Margaret was already advancing. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, establishing grips that were impossible to break without proper technique. Marcus, still processing what was happening, made the novice mistake of pushing against her directly, exactly what a skilled practitioner would anticipate. Margaret's response was immediate and flawless. She redirected his energy, creating an opening for a classic arm-bar transition. Marcus recognized the danger too late, attempting to stack and pass but finding himself caught in a perfectly executed trap. The submission was locked in before he could mount a proper defense, his arm extended in Margaret's precise control, pressure increasing steadily until he had no choice. Tap! Marcus gasped, slapping the mat with his free hand. The entire exchange had lasted less than 10 seconds. The revelation's silence descended like a heavy blanket. Students stood frozen, mouths open in astonishment. The elderly woman had just submitted their intimidating head instructor with a sequence so clean it could have been filmed for an instructional video. Margaret released her hold immediately and rose to her feet with surprising agility. She straightened her uniform and bowed respectfully to Marcus, who remained kneeling on the mat, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. "Thank you for the assessment opportunity, Instructor Rivera," she said calmly. "I hope that addresses your concerns about my abilities." The impossible had just happened, and they had all witnessed it. Marcus slowly got to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment. The studio remained eerily silent, the students too stunned to even whisper among themselves. Who are you?" he finally managed, his voice quieter now, the mockery completely gone. "I told you," Margaret replied, adjusting her belt calmly. Margaret Stone, third-degree black belt under Master Hiroshi Tanaka. One of the older students stepped forward, recognition dawning on his face. "Wait, Hiroshi Tanaka, the master who trained those champions in the 90s. And you're that Margaret Stone?" Margaret nodded modestly. "I was just one of his students." "One of his students?" the man continued, excitement creeping into his voice. "You were his first female black belt. I remember reading about you in martial arts magazines. Didn't you win the Pan-Pacific Championships 4 times? A murmur spread through the class like wildfire. Marcus's expression shifted from embarrassment to dawning realization. "That was a long time ago," Margaret said simply. "I never sought the spotlight. The practice itself was always what mattered to me." The transformation what followed was nothing short of remarkable. Marcus, to his credit, bowed formally and offered a sincere apology. "Mrs. Stone," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect, "I owe you an apology. My behavior was disrespectful and unbecoming of an instructor." Margaret acknowledged his apology with a slight nod. "We all make judgments based on appearances, Instructor Rivera. It's human nature. What matters is our willingness to revise those judgments when presented with new information." For the next hour, what had been planned as a regular training session transformed into an impromptu master class. Margaret demonstrated techniques with a precision born from decades of consistent practice. Her movements weren't as fast as they once had been, but her timing and leverage were impeccable. The students hung on her every word. "In my 44 years of practice," Margaret explained as they worked through a complicated guard passage, "I've learned that jiu-jitsu isn't about power or speed. Those fade with time. It's about understanding principles that never change: leverage, timing, balance, and most importantly, respect for both your opponent and yourself." The new beginning as the class wound down, the energy in the room had transformed completely. Students who had snickered at Margaret's arrival now approached her with questions, each interaction colored with newfound respect. Marcus watched from the edge of the mat, his expression thoughtful. When the last student had finished speaking with Margaret, he approached her again. "Mrs. Stone," he began, his voice lacking the false confidence that had characterized their first interaction, "I'd like to offer you a position here at Thunder Strike." Margaret raised an eyebrow, surprised by the proposal. "We have several programs that would benefit tremendously from your experience," Marcus continued. "Your technical knowledge is exceptional." "I didn't come here looking for employment, Instructor Rivera," Margaret replied. "I simply wanted to find a place to continue my own practice." "Of course," Marcus nodded. "You'd have full access to our facilities whenever you wish, but I hope you'll consider sharing your knowledge as well. Teaching even just one class a week would be invaluable to our students." Margaret considered the offer. She hadn't expected this outcome when she'd walked through the doors earlier that day. "I'll think about it," she said finally, "but I have one condition if I'm to train here regularly." "Name it," Marcus replied immediately. "This academy must be a place of respect for everyone who walks through that door, regardless of their age, gender, or appearance." Her eyes held his steadily. "What happened today should never happen to anyone else who comes here to learn." Marcus nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke with surprising grace. 6 months later, the ripple effect Thunder Strike martial arts had undergone a remarkable transformation. What had once been primarily a training ground for young competitive athletes had evolved into a more diverse and inclusive community. Twice a week, Margaret taught what had become known as the Fundamentals Plus class, open to practitioners of all ages and experience levels. The emphasis wasn't on athletic prowess or competition preparation, but on the timeless technical aspects of jiu-jitsu that Margaret had refined over decades. Surprisingly, these sessions became the most well-attended in the Academy's history. Younger students discovered that drilling fundamentals under Margaret's watchful eye improved their competition performance dramatically. Older practitioners found her methodical approach accessible and effective, allowing them to progress without risking injury. Most significantly, Marcus himself regularly participated in Margaret's classes, often serving as her demonstration partner. His initial embarrassment had given way to genuine respect and a hunger to learn from her deep technical knowledge. Mrs. Stone has forgotten more about pressure distribution than most of us will ever learn, he told a journalist from the local newspaper who came to write a feature about their unusual teaching partnership. The legacy continues today. The Academy was hosting a small in-house tournament. Competitors of various ages and belt levels participated, with Margaret and Marcus co-judging the matches. Between divisions, Margaret demonstrated key techniques with Marcus's assistance, breaking down the principles that spectators should watch for in the upcoming bouts.